Hello all, welcome back to my videos. Today we will see how we can access an EC2 instance using Internet Gateway through boto3. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to import the boto3 modules. I will write import boto3. Then the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to create an EC2 resource. So that will be my client equals boto3 dot client and then EC2 and then region underscore name equals US dash east dash 1. So here I'm going to use a dictionary in which I will be predefining my VPC CIDR and my subnet CIDRs. So to do that, I will use my NWID equals, let me create a key called as my VPC colon, and the CIDR that I'm going to use is 192.168.10.0 slash 24 for my VPC. I will use one more key that is called my subnet, and for that I will be using a CIDR of 192.168.10.0 slash 28. So I have predefined my dictionary with my VPCs with the VPC CIDR that I'm going to use and the subnet CIDR that I'm going to use. Next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create the VPC using a method called as create VPC, and I will extract the VPC ID and store it in the dictionary that I have created so that in the later part of the program I can use them in my while I create my subnet and my internet gateways. So to do that, I will create a key that is called as my underscore NWID, and the key name that I'm going to use is my VPC ID equals to my client dot create underscore VPC, and then inside that I will just mention CIDR block equals the CIDR block will be this particular key. So to access that, I will put as my underscore NWID and then the key name that is my VPC. So this will create my VPC. So now if I want to extract the VPC ID, then what I have to do is I have to use two more keys that is called as, because the response that this particular method gives is in a dictionary format. So I will be able to access the or extract the VPC ID using bracket VPC and then VPC ID. So this will assign the VPC ID to this particular variable that I have, or the dictionary key that I have created. One more thing which I'm going to do is that I'm going to create a tag specification. I have copied the same from the AWS documentation page, and I will use it over here. Let me put it over here and give me the resource name that I'm going to use is VPC. The key name that I want to create is name, and the value that I want to assign to that key is my dash sample dash VPC test. Okay, so this is going to create my VPC and it will assign the VPC ID to this particular key that I have created. The next thing what I'm going to do is that, as we know, while we create a new VPC, a default network ACLS and a route table is also created for that particular VPC. To identify this default network ACLS and the route table for my new VPC, I'm going to use a custom name. So to be able to do that, I have to use two functions or two methods called as describe network ACLS and describe route tables to extract the information about the default network ACLS and the default route tables that were created for my VPC, and I will use create tags to give a name to those default network ACLS and the network route tables. So to do that, what I will do is I will create a key because I want to extract the network ACLS ID, which I can use in my create tag method to assign a name to it. So let me create the new key, that is my NW ID, and then let me name the key as ACLS ID. Okay, and then I will call the method, that is describe underscore network underscore ACLS, and then I'm going to use a filter so that I can filter the information based upon the VPC ID that I have extracted previously. So to that I will use attribute called as filters equal, and then a key, and inside that it will be name, and the name that I am going to filter for, or the is or the attribute that I am going to filter for is VPC dash ID, and then the values for it will be the VPC ID that I have created, that I have extracted earlier, that will be my underscore NW ID, and then my VPC ID. Okay, so this looks good. Yeah, so this one looks good. Okay, so this one I'm closing over here. Okay, this is the one that I'm closing over there. Okay. Okay, so for values also there are, it's a list that will come. So okay, looks good. Okay, so I'm closing this list over here, this list, this, and finally this. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to extract, or I'm going to extract the network ACL ID from the response that I will get from this by calling this method called as describe network ACLS. So the first response it is a dictionary, so I will take a key value called as network ACLS, so network ACLS, and then once I access network ACLS, it will give me a list. So I want to access the first content of the list, and then again it will give me a dictionary. So I want to access the key called as network ACL ID. Right. So this way I will be able to get the network ACL ID, and I will assign it to this particular key that I have created. The next thing that I'm going to do is I will call a method called as create tags. So that will be my client dot create underscore tags, and inside that I will first call the resource that I'm going to use, that is a resource or resources, that will be equal to my underscore NWID, and the ACLS ID that I have extracted earlier. Okay, so this looks good. Now the next thing is that I'm going to use tags for it. So I will go ahead and type tags equal, and let me close this as well, comma, and then a curly braces, and then the key for it, and I would use a name, and then value, and then the name of the network default network ACLS that I have that got created. I will name it as my sam dot dash nwacl test. So I'm trying to put the same name. Like if you see, I'm using the prefix called as my dash sam. So I have used the same thing over here while I'm creating. So that way I will be able to identify that, okay, this is the default network ACLS that got created for my VPC. So I will do the same thing for my root tables as well. So I will copy the whole thing from here. We copy the whole thing and I will put it over here. Okay. So now what I'm going to change over here is that I will put it as root ID for my default root ID. I will create this particular key. Then I will change it here to describe underscore route tables. Okay, and the VPC ID will remain the same. And then here I'm going to change network ACLS to route tables and the route table ID. Route table ID. Okay, so this will give me the route table ID that got created for my default for my VPC. So I'm going to I'm going to name it as my sam root test. Okay, and here I need to change the key from ACLS ID to root ID. Okay, so this looks good. Fine. Now the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to create an internet gateway. So for that I will be calling a method called as internet gateway, and as before I have been doing, I will collect the internet gateway ID so that I can use it later. So let me create that key and my NWID, my NWID, and then I'm going to use the key is my GW, my internet. Let me say my IGW ID equals my client, and then the method that I'm going to call is create underscore internet underscore gateway. Okay, and as before, uh, what I will do is that I will copy this tag specifications so that I can give a name to my gateway ID, and the resource type is internet dash gateway. The key that I'm going to use is name again, and the value for it will be my dash sam dash internet gateway test. So looks good. Okay, so this will create my internet gateway. And now to extract my gateway ID, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use two keys over here. That is internet gateway and then internet gateway ID. So this is the way I will be extracting my internet gateway ID. So let me check the spellings. Internet gateway ID looks good here. So I'm collecting my internet gateway ID over here and I am assigning it to this particular key so that I can use it later on. Now, as I have created this gateway, now I have to attach this gateway to a VPC, for which I will call a method called attach internet gateway. So that will be my client dot attach underscore internet underscore gateway. And then I will mention the internet gateway ID. Gateway ID. So now you get the reason why I collected this internet gateway ID over here. So I will copy this and put it over here. And then I will also mention the VPC ID. So that will be my NW ID and then the VPC ID that we collected at the very beginning, my VPC ID, right? So this will attach this internet gateway that we created to the VPC that we have created earlier in this video. So now next thing what I'm going to do is that we will create a subnet so that I can assign that I can run my EC2 instance on that subnet. For that, I will use a method called as a create subnet, and as usual I have been doing, I will extract the subnet ID and so that I can use it in the later part of my program. So again I will use NWID and then create a create a key called as subnet ID and then my client dot create underscore subnet. Okay, and as you know, I will go ahead and use a tag specification. I will copy it, put it over here. This is called as subnet. Key will be name, value will be my dash sam dash subnet test. Okay, and few more additional attributes that I need to pass to this create subnet method is VPC ID, and that is the same that I collected over here. So let me copy this and put it over here. The next attribute that I am going to use is CIDR block, and that will be my underscore NWID, and then the value that we have assigned earlier in the dictionary, my subnet. Okay, so this looks okay. Okay, now I need to extract my subnet ID as well. So for that I will use this key called as subnet and then subnet ID. So this will give me the subnet ID of the from the method that I am using, that is called as create subnet. Looks fine. Now, as you know, when you create the subnet, you have this option whether you allow a public IP address to be assigned to a, you can allow or you can disallow the assignment of a public IP address to to an EC2 instance. So to modify that attribute of the subnet, I will be calling a method called as modify subnet attribute, and I will set the value for mapping public IP to true. So we can do that by calling my client dot modify underscore subnet underscore attribute. Okay, and then inside that, what I will do is mm, I will map. I will use this attribute called as map public IP on launch equals value is true. So all these attributes that I am using over here is present in AWS documentation for boto3, and you can take you can reference, which unusually I also reference to write this block of codes. Right. So the next attribute that I am going to use is subnet ID, and the subnet ID is what we have extracted over here. It is my NWID subnet ID, my ID, and then subnet ID over here. So now when my EC2 instance will launch, then it will automatically assign a public IP to that EC2 instance. If you set it to false, then the EC2 instance that you are going to initialize inside this subnet will not be assigned a public IP address. Next thing, I think we are almost done. Next thing is I'm going to create a security group. So as earlier, we have been extracting these IDs for each and every resource that we are creating. So I will do the same NWID, and then my SG ID looks equals to my client, and then the method is create underscore security underscore group. So let me put a description. Description equals my sample security group. And the next thing that I am going to also put is that what is the group name for it. Group name equals the same. Let me copy it from here and paste it over here. Okay. The next thing which I am going to use is the VPC ID, and that will be my underscore NWID, and oops, that will be my VPC ID. Okay, and then I will again use the tag specification. So let me copy it from here, the tag specification, and put it over here. Fine, it looks okay. Let me put this as security dash group, and then name, and then I'll put the same thing that I have over here. C and then Control V. Okay, so I must have, let me put a comma over here. Okay, so till then it's okay, it looks fine. Okay, so now the next thing that I'm going to do is, if you have seen my previous videos where I have shown how to create an ingress rule for the security groups, so we can do that. Okay, so now I have to take take my group ID as well. I missed that, so I'll extract the security ID of my security group. So it can be extracted through the key called as group ID. Now let me go and create the ingress rule. So my client dot authorize underscore security underscore group underscore ingress authorize security group ingress. Yeah. So here I will mention the group ID. That will be the one that I extracted here on the top. That is group ID. So I can access that using my NW ID, and then the key that I'm going to use is my SG ID. Oops, my SG ID. Okay, and after that I will be adding the permissions. So what I'm going to do is IP permissions equals okay. So let me create a dictionary over here. So the first thing that I have to put is from port. So I'm just enabling the SSH connection. So I'm using port number 22, comma IP protocol that should be TCP, and then the IP ranges that I'll be allowing. Sorry, IP ranges, and that will come as CIDR IP. This is the IP that I will be allowing, the range of IPs that will be allowing. So for now, I'm not restricting anything. I'm just saying 0.0.0.0/0, and then the description I want to use for it is allow SSH. Okay, and the destination port will be 2 port, and that's 22. Okay, so I'm opening the in security in the inbound rule for my security group for port number 22. Okay, the next thing we are left behind or left with is to create an EC2 instance. Or what we can do is I'll just log into my console, and we'll go to the EC2 instance over here, and I will start an EC2 instance. I'll launch an EC2 instance. Let me select this. Okay, configure instance details. Okay, okay. Why is not the to launch an instance? You need to create a subnet in VPC console. Okay, I got it. So now what I'm going to do is that I will go ahead and execute it so that it will create the VPC for me to use. So I will go ahead and run it. Okay, EC2 object describe root underscore tables. Okay, so I think I did some mistake over here. Some typo error. Let me go back, go back, go back, go back. That will be root underscore tables. Yeah, so as I'm not doing any error control, so what will happen is that it will create the VPC. So now I have to cancel this and I have to go to my VPC and then clean it up again. So my VPCs, where did it go? Yeah, my VPC is over here. So I will select this and I will delete this VPC. Delete. So I will delete this. So I don't have any default root tables for my VPC and I don't have a network ACLS for my, okay. This looks good. Now let me go back and try to run it again. Okay, so this time it finished with exit code 0. So now let's connect to my console. I will refresh it. And if you see, this is the VPC that got created. Now this is the default root that got created. So if you see my SAM root test, and this is the network, this is the default network ACLS that got created. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I will, okay, let's see about my security groups as well. I can find from the EC2 console as well. So if you go over here, you can see my default EC2 instance, my default security group has been created. And if you check over here, you see the inbound rule also has got created. So now I want to launch an instance in this particular security group. So to do that, let me go over here, launch instance and select instance. T2 micro, fine, configure. Let's see my this thing. Okay, so now if you see auto assign public IP is set. Okay, add storage. I want only 4 GB, that is fine for me. Then review and launch. Okay, so it's default 8. Okay, so let me put and review and launch. Okay, so here my security group that I got created because I did not change it was launch wizard 1, so I need to change it. Security group, you select an existing security group and I want to select the security group that I have created and then review and launch. Okay, and then launch it. I have already have an uh, key pair, so I know this one and I will launch it. Okay, now let's wait for some time. So if you see over here, now there is a public IP assigned to it and it's connected to security group, my SAM security group, and It is also connected to the VPC that I have created, right? So we'll wait for this instance to be ready. Okay, so now my EC2 instance is fully launched. Let me try to access it. So let me copy this IP address over here and then over here and try to access it to see what happens. So this is the session that I am running. And right now, if you see over here, I am unable to connect to the EC2 instance to the putty session, even though I have allowed port number 22, even though I have allowed port number 22 on my security group, it's not allowing me to connect. The reason being is that I have not updated the root tables. So here, if I go to my VPC and go to the root tables, if you see the default root tables routes, I'm not I have not created a route to my internet gateway, due to which it is not able to connect. So to do that, what I can do is what I will do is, let me comment all this out. Everything is commented out. Okay. I will call a method called as create root. So my client dot create underscore root, and in that I need to pass the destination CIDR block, and that will be 0.0.0.0/0, and I have to also pass in the gateway ID as well as the root table ID. So if I go back to my AWS console, this is my root table ID. So I can copy it and I can put it over here, and then again go back to the console, and then I have to find the gateway ID. So this is my gateway that has been created. So this is the internet gateway ID. I will copy this and I'm going to put it over here. So let me make sure that I have commented out everything. Nothing is running. Okay. Okay. So now if you see in this console, you don't see that root, right? So it just says target is local. Now when I go ahead and execute it, so it finished. And now if I just refresh it, you can see that my root is created over here. Now when I try to connect to the EC2 instance, let's see what, oops, sorry, not this one. Let me copy the EC2 instance, EC2. Let me copy this public IP and put it over here. Now let's see what happens. So now if you see over here, it allows me to connect to the EC2 instance. So this is the way you can connect an internet gateway to your VPC. Hopefully this video helped you understand how to connect an internet gateway to a VPC. We'll meet up in our next video with some new interesting topic. Till then, take care and have a great day. Bye bye.